startup to a $425 million acquisition by Atlassian and beyond. So today we're going to dive into a bunch of the lessons and tactics Stella and her team deployed along the way. As a quick reminder, before we get started, members of the Launch Awesome community get to hear about events like this first. Launch Awesome is a Slack community for product managers and product marketers to connect and learn from each other. We've got more than 200 of the best in product and product marketing in there today. If you want to join, Steve is going to actually drop a link in the chat right now. So we'd love to see you in there. And we're going to start with some great questions that members of the Launch Awesome community have already submitted. And then we'll also jump to some live questions from folks in the audience. So if you're in the audience live and you want to submit a question, go ahead and drop it in the chat widget on your screen at any time during the talk, and we'll get through as many as we can later on in the session. So let's get into it. Stella, thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah, I am excited to be here. And for folks who are here, if you want me to dive more into something or you want a clarifying question, like I am very chill and easygoing, so feel free to just throw a question into the chat and I'll address it.
Amazing. Thank you for the call out. We'll be sure to do that. And yeah, I'd love to start with maybe just talk us through what the early days at Trello looked like, maybe what state, if any, marketing was in when you joined, and then kind of what were some of those inflection points your team grew into along the way.
Okay, so I joined Trello in the summer of 2014. We had just raised a Series A round of funding, and the team was, I think, about 12 or 13 people, almost all engineers. We had an HR person, an ops person, and then the rest almost all engineers and product folks. So I was the first marketer, and it's really a fun thing to be the first marketer at a product focused tech company, because then you get to convince everybody that product or that marketing and sales are important, and that the product doesn't just sell and market itself. So that was like a very a fun few months of just trying to prove to the team and show the team that the power of marketing. And I'm happy to talk more about how I did that. And so when I joined Trello, we had already had some success as a product. We had, I think, a couple million free users. Maybe it was closer to 3 million signups or users, whatever you want to call it. And so, but what we really wanted was, our goal was always to grow to 100 million users. And it seemed like a crazy goal in those early days. And so that was like the charter for marketing was really about growth in the early days. And the way that I thought about it was to double down on the things that Trello was really good at, which was clearly having an insanely organically viral product. And so I became like best friends with all of the engineers and product people, because I saw my function and my team, which I'll talk about the team structure in a minute, but our goal was really to amplify everything that was going on in the product. And given how fast we were growing organically, there were no plans to do any sort of paid marketing, because any calculation of doing that was completely inefficient. What we really wanted to do was grow the user base organically as fast as we could. Ironically, we were one of the, I think, first really successful, what's now called product-led growth companies, but really we were just figuring it out as we went along. And so that was a really foundational insight for us, was just to be the closest of friends with all of the product managers. And we didn't even really know what product marketing was. It was just, that was the marketing that we were doing, was helping bring all of these features to market and showing our user base when and how and all the different ways that they could use Trello in their lives and at work. And so our team, and also content marketing became a big part of that. So I think of content marketing and product marketing very closely related. That was our first sort of team that we built out, was around content and social and community. And then I think there was an inflection point. My team was about maybe 6 or 7 people, and we hired a VP of sales right around the time that I was starting. And it was kind of hilarious because our VP of sales was used to, marketing, supporting sales with MQLs and all of that good stuff. And I was doing none of that because my charter was just simply growth. And so when the company hit a stage where monetization became much more of a focus, and we sort of, I think we hired our VP of sales before we had any sort of enterprise product, and she helped us figure out exactly which features we should be building into an enterprise product. That was when we started to develop some of the more traditional sales enablement and metrics around supporting a sales team in an enterprise product. And then actually not long after that, we were acquired by Atlassian in 2017, right as we had really started to mature our marketing strategy and be much more revenue driven. I think we were both both user growth and revenue driven at that time. And then it was really interesting. My team was put under the product marketing umbrella at Atlassian, which was hilarious because again, we didn't really know what product marketing was. It was just part of what we did. The rest, I guess, is history. We grew under Atlassian. I think I left last fall, and my team was, I think, around 30 people in size, if you count all of the like the analysts and comms folks and sort of auxiliary team members. So that and we reached our 100 million user milestone also while I was there. So that was really exciting. So yeah, I'm happy to dive into any and all other things. It was a lot.
No, fantastic overview. Thank you for that. And I think we both know that product marketing umbrella at Atlassian can be a very broad umbrella. So I'm sure you were able to pack a lot into that change and role there as well. I'd love to know, you mentioned you were first marketer in the door and a few other roles like content and PMM that came in along the way. But can you recall sort of like at a kind of tactical level, like which other marketing functions or marketing roles you brought in? And in what order, and kind of how you thought through the progression of that team?
Yeah, definitely. So I would just maybe preface by saying that at a startup, you really want to hire generalists. And the way that I think about it is that maybe a person is really good at one specific area, but they can do anything else almost just as well. And so the first hire that we had was a content person who, Lauren, who is actually still at Atlassian and is now in a senior product marketing manager role. So content was the first thing that we really built out, and I would put brand with that as well. We weren't doing like traditional brand marketing in the sense of running ads or doing big I guess paid campaigns, but brand was a huge part of, I think, why Trello was successful, and brand and product went really hand in hand for us. So content was the first area that we built out, and I would put SEO and brand under that, and then PMM, and then sales enablement, and who after that, and then I think at Atlassian, we became more well-rounded in the sense that, we never had an analyst for the marketing team, a dedicated analyst before the acquisition, because we didn't have any analysts actually, I think, at all. We had just started building out our data team. And so we would try to grab, 1/10 or one data engineer's time. And so it was really nice to be able to have more functions. Like one other thing I'll mention is we also focused a lot on PR in the early days of Trello, but that was something that we outsourced. And it was great once we were under the Atlassian umbrella to have a dedicated communications partners as well. So I think that was a little bit of the structure. So I will say it was a very product-led growth situation in that, outside of, we didn't have like MQL targets once we started building out the sales team, but we were really like trying to figure out, and I think a lot of the PLG companies now are still trying to figure out what is a product qualified lead versus a marketing qualified lead, and how do you get those people to a human? Is it a sales human? Is it a customer success human? I think a lot of those processes are even still being defined.
Yeah, that's a fantastic sort of lay of the land. I'm sure super helpful for folks in the audience as they kind of think through building out their own teams. I'm also curious, and kind of relates to a question we got from the crowd, but the sort of inflection points that maybe it's the marketing team or just the whole company noticed along the way. I'm sure the kind of quick rate of growth you saw there. I have to imagine there were a few of those moments where it kind of felt like the game had changed a little bit. I'm curious what those moments looked like, and maybe how, as a marketing leader, you thought about sort of adapting to rise to those challenges.
Certainly. Well, I think for for a startup that was growing in the industry and category that we were, I thought it was very important for us to have a steady beat of product, a steady like drumbeat of product news and updates that we could use for marketing and product launches. And so we would sit down and we would, and in the early days especially, there wasn't really a product roadmap, or maybe there was, but it was very much in flux. And so we would sit down and we would say, okay, like when is the next product launch? When is there something that we can do within the next quarter? And I think that those planned out product launches ended up being big inflection points, because we would see our sign up, which was, our North Star was the sign up graph. We would see that, it would like plateau, and then we would have a product launch, and we would build up a lot of storytelling and maybe some fundraising news or metrics, milestones, etc. And then it would go up again. And that would be the new plateau. And then until we had our next product update or our marketing launch. And that would set us on a different trajectory. And so I think we did a really good job of storytelling, especially because it was a time when a lot of these work tools were really gaining adoption in a way that they hadn't been previously. I'll give an example. When we were hiring a PR firm, I was thinking, what would be the best strategic communications win for us? And at the time, Slack was like the hottest thing growing. And often people would mention Slack and Trello in the same sentence because they were used hand in hand. And so I actually sought out who Slack's PR firm was, and I hired them because I was like, anytime someone is talking about Slack, they should also talk about Trello, and let's like incentivize them to talk about Trello. And I thought, as a result of that, we had a lot of really great PR opportunities. And that amplified a lot of our story more than we were looking for. Actually, yeah, there's more, but we can move on to the next question.
Well, sort of related to this this line of conversation, we had a great question around just process and implementing process as startups grow. And curious, that's always a trade-off. Do you add too much process or not have enough, and how do you kind of balance being structured and documenting the right things with kind of moving fast and being scrappy? And would love if you could share just sort of tactically, what were some of the nuts and bolts kind of processes, meetings, tenets of the marketing team that you put into place, and maybe how did those change along the way, and what do you think was most helpful looking back?
Well, I'm a huge fan of process. It's no wonder that I ended up being in project management, because I'm a very type A personality. And at the same time, though, I think you have to be very flexible, because I've always worked in startups in my career in some capacity, and things are just always dynamic and changing. And so your process, it's great to have a process, but also to have the flexibility to change that process fairly easily. The other thing is, we were growing, I was hired remotely from the beginning, and we had a small office in New York, but we ended up growing the company as a distributed team for a lot of the reasons, better talent. We also wanted to, dog food our own product, because we were a project management tool that helped teams collaborate. So some of the things that we did early on, when we were a small team, so let's say the marketing team was a team of 3, we would meet, like, I want to say at least once or twice a week. One thing that we did that was really important from the early days was to have a private Slack channel where we built our own sort of culture within the marketing team. And I think that was important because, everyone is a marketing expert at the company and has opinions about what you are doing. And so we just wanted to have a kind of a safe haven where we could, just without judgment, share content and ideas and thoughts. And so one thing that we learned early on is that different teams use communication tools and collaboration tools differently. So we started a tradition where I think maybe once a quarter or once every 6 months, we had a working document of what our communication style and preferences were as a team. We had a rule that if something took more than like 2 minutes to explain, that you would hop into a Zoom and talk in video, because there's so much more empathy and understanding that can come from a video conversation. We also had rules around overlap hours. So we overlap between 12 and 4. That was actually all of Trello, because Eastern time. And the expectation was that if anyone was going to have a meeting, it would be between those hours, and any other time, like you were not expected to be available for a meeting. You could do deep work. My team also instituted really early on focus days. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, no meetings, because there's a lot. I think, you can be in Slack all day and feel like you're working, but you're actually not getting anything done. And some of the other processes that we instituted, we had a Trello board for all of our meetings that had an agenda that anyone could add to it. You would never show up to a meeting without an agenda. You'd also were very critical about any sort of regular cadence of meetings. So we definitely had our one, we called it the club marketing meeting. That was once a week, where we would share things that we're working on. And I sort of helped as the leader craft what the agenda looked like. But then we changed it to be biweekly as the team grew, because there wasn't as much overlap in what people were working on. Some other things that were really great culturally for our team, we had a thing called, what was it called? We called it Fuck Up Fridays, I think, and then we ended up changing it, because we would go at the end of our team meeting and we would say like something that we failed at this week, and we would celebrate failure and normalize failure, which I think is really important. And then we also did a thing at the end of our team meetings where we gave kudos to each other. And that's how we ended the team meeting, where it was like, thank you to Blake for helping me with this design thing. Like, I was completely lost, and he really stepped up, and it would just helped recognize our teammates, and that we were working all together. So those are just some things. I think from a planning standpoint, that was always very dynamic. I used to, gosh, when we started, we set monthly goals, and that was horrible. That was like the first thing we changed was like, Stella, we can't, that is way too short of a cadence. Like, what are you even thinking? And then we changed it to be bi-monthly, because quarterly at a startup it's a long time. Like to do quarterly planning, you just don't know. And then when we were acquired by Atlassian, that was actually a huge shift for my team, for actually the Trello team, because my team had way more process than the product and engineering teams. Was the annual OKR setting and the whole, so much structure on planning. We just never had that because we were a startup.
Yeah, I think the joke there was always annual planning's done. Great, we can start next year's planning.
Exactly.
As soon as it wrapped up, you were starting to think about next year, or the next quarter or whatever.
For our product teams, it was a huge culture shock, because they just never, they never really had a lot of, our culture at Trello was very collaborative and very flat in terms of things that we were shipping, and there was a lot of there just wasn't a lot of hierarchy or planning, and it was really great, but it also gave me a lot of anxiety as a type A person, because I like to have things planned out.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Speaking of the product team, we had a lot of questions about working with product teams. A lot of our audience is sort of at that intersection of product teams and product marketing, or more broadly, just kind of the product thinkers in the organization. And curious a little bit on how did the product and product management organization scale alongside marketing in your team? And then how did you sort of most effectively manage that relationship?
Yeah, so I am very close still with our head of product, Justin, and we would just be very collaborative from the beginning. And that was the basis of the relationship. And so as I started hiring marketers and product marketers, and he started hiring product managers, I think that sort of idea of we never really like had a conversation of where product ends and marketing begins. I think that is a big part of Trello too. Like the whole brand experience is like consistent from the very moment that you come onto the landing page throughout every interaction. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that there wasn't a lot of like, there wasn't a lot of like, oh, this is a product thing, or oh, this is a marketing thing. It was like, we're going to work together to make this the best possible experience. And as you know, as we scaled, so once we started having like many product managers and many PMMs, we added layers of structure on top of that. The first thing was defining, what does a PMM do? What does a PM do? What does a designer do? Especially as we adopted a triad structure, like the traditional, you know, product triads. It was like, well, where do PMMs fit into that? And initially we went a little overboard where we had a PMM on every single triad and had them be more of a quadrad. And then we had to pull back because it didn't make any sense to have a PMM on every single thing. The thing that was important though was for the PMs and for everyone to understand how important marketing was. And I think that was maybe one thing that was different about Trello, that I talked to a lot of other companies about this, and marketers really struggle. And I think we did a really good job of educating everyone on those teams about the fact that, hey, like, you guys are doing this amazing work. Like, we need to get this out in a way that our users will get excited about it. And what's the story behind it? And what are the assets that are going to tell the story? And how can we do this in a way that fits in with Trello's brand? And so, you know, I think that was the overall thinking. And then we had more of the structure around, like, for example, who talks to the support team, who creates the content about, you know, the Q&A stuff. And it was like, okay, the PMs do that. All right, well, who deals with the sales team? Well, that's a PMM thing. So we had like a page where we were like, this is what the PMM does. This is what the PM does. This is what the designer does. And here are the expectations. We also did a really great thing that I recommend at a certain size, where we would look at a package of like product stuff, and we would put it in a category of the type of launch we were going to run. So we had like funny boat names for it. So is it a yacht? And we only did like 2 yachts a year, and a yacht had press coverage and all of these assets and a campaign. And then it went all the way down to like a canoe, which was like, we're going to let our power users know through these channels, et cetera. So I think as we scaled, we added a lot of process.
Yeah. No, that's all really incredible advice. And especially around just, you obviously had excellent sort of cohesion and relationships with the whole product org. And as a user, like the end user experience it's telling, and it makes a difference. And I always thought Trello did a great job with that, where it was, you know, it felt like a seamless experience going from the marketing site into the application, into the support experience. As a user, you weren't, and some companies and products, you sort of feel the clunkiness of going from one experience to the other. But you all always had did a great job of making that user experience sort of seamless. So it didn't feel like you were going from marketing to sales to product. It was all just sort of one Trello experience.
I would say that was a very conscious and consistent effort. There is this idea about, you know, shipping the org chart, and we were always very conscious of not shipping the org chart.
Yeah. I'd love to switch gears to, we got a bunch of great questions about remote. I know Trello was this amazing sort of like early pioneer in remote. It was actually funny. Just the other day, there was a bunch of Elon Musk in the news again, and he was saying that he was talking about all employees going back to the office, and made the declaration that remote companies aren't making great products, basically, which I think obviously we both and a lot of people disagree with. But would love to know what are your remote tips, especially as it relates to making sure great products are getting into the hands of the right people.
Yeah, well, that Elon Musk hot take is really interesting, because I think it really reflects the founder's values. And I think in that case, like if you read it all about the work practices, it's like, you know, hiring people in their 20s who are working 100 hours a week, sleeping at the office. And, you know, I've known some folks. I love Tesla. I own 3 Teslas. Well, I own 2 Teslas, and then my child has a little baby Tesla. So I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan, but I would never want to work in that sort of chaotic environment where people are making decisions like based on whatever the fire is, right? So I think there are so many great companies that are working remotely. I think it's one of the huge silver linings of the pandemic was this normalization of remote work, because before that we had to really like lead by example. And even at Atlassian, it was very anti-remote work. And we were trying to, as Trello, we were very much like, look, this is such a great model and we'll help you figure out how to scale it. And then as soon as the pandemic hit and you had to be remote, Atlassian was one of the first companies to go completely remote, which was really validating, I think, for a lot of the Trello team. So some things that I highly recommend. First of all, remote work does not mean no FaceTime. In fact, it's the opposite. It means that FaceTime is so important. However, you have a limited amount of it, right? Like you have an offsite maybe once a quarter, maybe once every 6 months or whatever, maybe a whole company annual offsite. But how are you going to use that time to build relationships? And my team members have some of the strongest relationships. We've been at each other's weddings. We're friends outside of work. And sure, none of us live in the same place, but it doesn't matter because, honestly, these days, who all lives in the same place anyway, right? Like our families are spread out, our college friends are spread out. So that's a really important thing, is to have offsites. And I would say that the offsite should be more focused on building social connection than doing any sort of work related stuff. At Trello, we had an annual team offsite where all we did was hang out and do fun stuff. Like one of my favorite memories, we went to Puerto Rico and we went kayaking in the moonlight, and we did what's it called when you're on the racetrack with the cars.
Go-karts?
Go-karts, yeah. In fact,
Go-karts.
It was hilarious. We had like one work thing that we were going to do that day.
Yeah.
And we drove by a go-karting track and our CEO was like, no, turn the bus around. We're going go-karting. So yeah, FaceTime. FaceTime's really important. Some of the other things I think are having really defined processes, because what's happening in an office environment is that people show up and there are a lot of queues. What time do people get there? What time do people have lunch? When is it okay to be away from your computer? What time do people leave? And in a remote working environment, you have to be much more vocal about what the norms and cultural practices are. Otherwise, people start to guess and it ends up being not a healthy situation. I think that you also have to be really respectful of people's time, especially people who are working in positions that require a lot of creative or deep work. And so these folks right now who are in back-to-back meetings all day, like that is a very Zoom meetings. It is a very unsustainable way of working remotely. And it's not going to be the way that we're long-term working remotely. I can tell you that. So I think it's up to leaders to set the example of, hey, I'm blocking 2 hours in my calendar for focus time. And that's when I'm going to knock out these strategic priorities. And if you schedule a meeting on top of that, I'm not going to be there. Like, I'm just not. And I think, so I think that's really important. I think it's also important to get to know your folks, like socially. And so we had a practice where on Monday mornings, we would share in our private channel what we did over the weekend. And that was a way to, and because during the offsites, we had built those friendships, like people felt comfortable sharing their photos of their kids and or hobbies and things like that. So, I mean, I can go on and on and on. I think remote work is such a huge unlock for people's lives. It lets you prioritize the things that are important to you, and also and help you use your time in a way that is most optimal to you personally. Everyone is different when it comes to when they're the most productive. I think the next real big thing that folks need to figure out is the balance of synchronous time, so time spent in meetings or on Slack, and the asynchronous time. That's the future of remote work.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there in that last part, certainly. But amazing advice, especially around the social aspect that can be so overlooked, and it can be so easy to fall into a pattern with remote work where everything just sort of tends to be transactional. And then you don't get to know, you may be talking with the same people every day, but you never really get the chance to know them as humans. And those, whether it's a quarterly offsite or an annual get together or whatever it looks like, it's just a feeling of like recharging the whole team's batteries. And you can really feel it, back at both that week when you're doing it, and then kind of back in Slack the following week. Like you can really just, there's a new energy that comes from getting together like that. So yeah, it feels like table stakes for a good remote team, to be honest. Well, cool. We've got about 10 minutes left. I know Steve has some questions he's going to pop in, maybe live questions that we've gotten through. So maybe we can try to get through a couple of these sort of semi-rapid fire style. And we'll start with this. Talia from Airbyte asks, how do you approach getting updates on really small deployments that even the product team might not know about? Do you make the responsibility of product or just deprioritize certain types of product changes when it comes to communicating with users? So yeah, a lot of granular updates these days. I think that's kind of the spirit of this question.
Yeah, what we did was we had a channel in Slack called Changelog, and the engineers would post whenever things got updated. And so I think there were product folks and PMMs who had their eyes on that channel, and we would sort of make a list of things, and maybe there were a handful of things that we could share in a blog post that all had a theme around them, or we would if it was a bigger thing, we would work with the product folks on having something that was like a larger launch. I think that I think the bigger things you have more of a strategy around, where you're making campaigns and it's part of a larger narrative. But then these smaller things can also give the power users some fodder to keep them engaged. So I would make a list of the different channels that you have at your disposal, and how you're going to communicate changes that are interesting to users. I think the real big opportunity for marketers is to take those small changes, which may not be important to like a lot of people, and but to figure out how to tell the story, or what the assets are that will get a certain segment of the user base really excited about it.
Yeah.
There's always stuff that's being shipped, yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. I think that's such a great lesson and a great reminder that, as product marketers, it doesn't have to be an either or thing too. You see that all the time. And we're obviously at Launch Notes, we're big advocates of communicating, with frequency and often about the product changes that are happening. But that doesn't mean you don't, as marketers, find opportunities to bundle those into bigger narratives and bigger moments, and sort of strategically make a lot of noise when the time is right in the sort of bigger channels and bigger brand splash kind of ways too. So it's there's kind of a way to live in both those worlds, I think. Cool. Let's see if we have any others. I think we're going to pop up a new question here. We've got Raul from Sentry.io asking, getting accurate timelines from engineering product design can be tough sometimes, which makes planning and announcing product/features a little difficult. Any tips or tricks on how to make sure launches happen on time and go smoothly?
What? A slipping timeline? That has never happened. Those engineers, they always ship on time, right, Blake?
Yeah, I've never heard of this. This must be a hypothetical.
Well, the reality is, I talk to a lot of teams, and this is it, guys. It's always a bit of a shit show, and there's always a bit of like uncertainty about when things happen. And so one thing that I've learned over the years is, number one, obviously you have to be flexible. But number two, I think that when you are announcing things, they don't have to be 100% available to everybody when you're making the announcement. And you can also decouple sort of the product launch part of it from the marketing launch part of it, and also even from the PR launch part of it. In an ideal world, you would try to have everything be connected, but but a lot of companies, and you can see this from larger companies where there's a lot more complexity in their product announcements, where they'll say things like, and this will be available, within the next few weeks or something like that. So again, I think that in the ideal scenario, there's some timeline that everybody is really moving towards, and maybe there's a day or two of flexibility there. Yeah. But obviously with something like a press embargo, there's not. So I think the most important part of all of this is communication, and having the relationships with your engineering and product teams where they understand what's at stake, and that it is a big deal to move something a day or two.
Yeah, that's really great advice. That's, I think, all product teams and product marketers especially should take to heart. It can be so easy to get stuck in this thinking of like everything is behind one switch. Your marketing, your comms, your brand, your updates, the features, the support, the sales enablement, like you can and should sort of tier that out in smart ways. And like you said, look at big companies, look at the way Apple does, iPhone announcements months before iPhones are on the shelves, or we talked about Tesla, the way they'll announce new vehicles and have waiting lists and such going into new rollouts. Like, you can and should get creative, especially with modern tools like feature flags and even frankly what we're doing with launch notes. Like, you can be a lot more sort of tactical and exercise some finesse with launch rollouts. It's not one day, one shot kind of thing.
Definitely.
Let's see if we can get through a few more here. We've got Sibby from Calm Company Fund asking, thinking about how marketing metrics change as a company scales up. What's important for day 1, day 90, year 1, etc.? Great question.
That's a great question. And I think that the way that I'm going to answer this is to say that it's going to be different for every company depending on what the company's overall goals are. But the thing that is really important is that every marketing activity that you're doing is measurable and has some sort of goal, so that you know whether you're moving the needle. So I think that's probably the most important thing, because a lot of times people don't measure marketing activities, and the ones that are more ambiguous, like a marketing launch, or let's say press or something. But there should always be goals around that. So yeah, I think this one, that's the takeaway, is that there should always be some metric that you're held accountable to, but that it's probably going to change depending on what the strategic priorities are for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can maybe cruise through a few more here. We've got Chris from markettorevenue.com asking, what were the 3 most impactful product/marketing plays Stella ran at Trello? Big question.
Ooh, that is a big question. So I'll blow through a few. I don't know if they were the most important. I definitely think the investing in the relationships, that is key. It's just, you just got to do it. Let me think. User-generated content was always really big with Trello, and thinking about ways that, for example, we use public boards to share more ways that Trello could be used. Brand was really, really big with Trello. Our brand was all about user delight and fun, and we had really fun little Easter eggs throughout the product that people were really obsessed with. One example of that is that our newsletter, and I think to this day it comes from Taco, who was our spokes husky. And people would always be like, who's Taco? Why am I getting an email from Taco? And that was part of the fun, was like figuring out who Taco was. I think maybe one overall big strategy for us in unlocking user growth was making it as easy as possible for people to use Trello. So removing a lot of the boundaries. For example, we were pretty early to be a best-in-class mobile app for a category. And that was something that we weren't really like monetizing directly. It was more that people use Trello on the go. We want them to, and we're going to be available wherever you are. The other thing, some of the other examples of that were, we were one of the, we internationalized the product into 21 different languages fairly early on. And that was a fun marketing situation where we were doing like global localized marketing with a team of like 4. But the whole idea was that, again, you can use Trello. There's no like language boundary to using Trello wherever you are. And I think that those were some things that really kickstarted but that helped our like loop of user growth over time, our virality, you'd say. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think we're close on time here. Let's try to squeeze one more in. This is Dave from Hopin. Talk about a company that's had an incredible run. What would you say is the number one frustration that happens between product and marketing teams? How would you solve it? Another big question.
That's a great question. I get this all the time. And I think the thing is that people don't understand like marketing, what marketing does. And like people think that marketing is just paid ads or billboards. And that is just the tip of the iceberg for marketing. So, and even with product too, I think that there's a lot of miscommunication about how product is developed and what those processes are like. And maybe there's frustration from the marketing side about how long things take. And I really, really think this is the thing that I'm going to hammer into everyone's brain, is that if you have good relationships, if you invest in getting to know your peers, getting to know their processes, getting to know them as humans, you build a lot of empathy. And so when something does happen that's really frustrating for you, you can lean on the fact that you have a lot of trust with these humans, and you can work through the issue together instead of trying to be like, well, this is marketing's fault, or hey, product is slipped on the timeline again.
Yeah. That's amazing advice. And I, especially as you get into the monetization side, like you're dealing with decisions for people that can be multiple thousands of dollars, and folks kind of sticking their career reputation on. So I always say, like, these are not impulse buys. Like, you need to have a lot of touch points with folks and build up some trust. It's not going to be saw an ad and converted all in one cleanly attributable sort of web session. A lot of these things, they kind of take time. So great advice around just like sort of setting up that patience. Before we wrap up here, I'm going to sneak a question in. What's your favorite Trello power tip?
What's my favorite Trello power tip? Okay, I think just off the top of my head, if you put the confetti emoji into the title, like a done, just do that and see what happens.
Okay, nice, great. I'm sure we'll all try that on our boards this afternoon. So, we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all the time. I think it was a ton of fun. I'm sure we could talk all day, but ton of value for our audience today. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all. It was so great to be here. I'm a huge fan of Blake and Jake and Tyler and all of the team. And if you have any other questions or you out, I am at Startup Stella on Twitter.
Amazing. And just before we wrap up, quick note for the audience as well. These events are put on by the Launch Awesome community, and Steve is going to, I think he just dropped a link in the chat right now. So if you want to be sure to hear about future events, go ahead and join our community on Slack. And speaking of future events, I know our next event is going to be with a really exciting guest. We've got Marcus Andrews, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Pendo, who's going to join us. I think we're still nailing down a date. So if you want to be the first to learn when that is going to happen, go ahead and join the community, and we'll let you know as soon as we officially announce that. But otherwise, Stella, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.